This is the second class in our first course, Created on Purpose or Evolved by Chance. Is there scientific, historical, and logical reasons to believe that the Bible is true and God is the creator of the universe? In this class, we'll take a close look at the evidence for a worldwide flood as recorded in the historical record of the Bible. Let's get started.
So this is my second video in his course about Noah's flood. He had a lot to say about the flood, unfortunately, so I'm breaking them up into smaller segments.
You know, if I could convince you that the story of the flood in the Bible never happened, how would that affect your view of the Bible? Well, it would cause you to doubt it, wouldn't it? Charles Lyell knew this, and he actually planned on causing people to doubt the Bible by demonstrating, deceiving really, manipulating the geological evidence to say that the earth was very old, not recently created.
Charles Lyell wasn't the first person to believe that the earth was very old, and he certainly didn't set out to just make sure that people didn't believe the Bible. In his book, Principles of Geology, the subtitle says, "An attempt to explain the former changes of the Earth's surface by reference to causes now in operation," that later became known as uniformitarianism.
He lived from 1797 to 1875, and he came up with a theory called uniformitarianism. And this is the idea that all the geological features we see on planet Earth took huge amounts of time to come into existence.
But that's not what uniformitarianism is. It means the present is the key to the past, and it was first proposed by James Hutton. It means the past history of our globe must be explained by what can be seen to be happening now.
If you look at the Grand Canyon today, it has all this strata and what look like layers etched in the cliffs of the Grand Canyon.
Well, now we're finally getting to the good stuff, because I've been to the Grand Canyon many, many times and studied the layers close up. Here I am with my kids about 15 years ago.
If you were to ask an evolutionist where those strata came from, they would typically say, the lower you go, the older the strata.
Correct, because the law of superposition states that in an undisturbed sequence of sedimentary rock, each layer is older than the one above, and each layer is younger than the one below.
So they look at the strata as Earth history. If you go all the way down to the bottom, you get to Precambrian. Then right above that is Cambrian, which is 600 million years ago. Now, if evolution were true, what you would see is you'd see down at the very bottom in the 600 million year level, you'd see animals that are the least evolved. And then as you moved all the way to the top, you'd see animals that were the most evolved. And that's how they lay out what's called their geologic column.
Well, that's not true at all. How evolved animals are has nothing to do with the way the geologic column is laid out. It's based on the law of superposition, which I mentioned before.
Okay, you can see here at the very bottom you have things like trilobites, you have soft-bodied creatures, and then if you go all the way to the top you have humans, and along the way you run into dinosaurs and other things like that. And so, is this true? Well, this geologic column can't be found anywhere on planet Earth except in a textbook. There is no place in the world that matches this sequence of events just like they have laid out here.
The geologic column doesn't have to exist all in one place for the information to be valid. It's a collection of data from geologists all over the world.
What do creationists say about how the Grand Canyon was formed? Well, they say that all the layers were laid down simultaneously in a short amount of time. So essentially, what happened was the creatures in the bottom of the ocean were buried first, then more and more creatures, and the strata is laid out based on just the composition of the material. Okay, so as you get higher and higher, you're going to find more and more large animals who are able to get away from the water, climb up the mountains, whatever, and they're buried last. And so essentially all these layers were laid down quickly.
And that's where the creationist model really fails. We see tiny marine fossils all over the top of the Grand Canyon that would have been at the bottom of an ocean. And we also see layers that are totally void of vertebrate fossils at all, like the Coconino sandstone, that only contain tracks.
Now, do we have evidence that the creationist perspective is true and the evolutionary perspective is false? Absolutely. We have tons of evidence that that's the case. That's part of what we're going to be discussing in this class, as well as the next class and the class after that.
Well, you're not doing very well so far, but let's see if you can do any better.
So the two basic theories about the past go like this. In a creationist timeline, everything was created about 6,000 years ago. Okay, that was when creation started. About 4,400 years ago, there was a what? Take a wild guess.
A flood.
Has to do with the topic of this class. Very good. If you said Noah's flood or a worldwide flood, you are correct. About 2,000 years ago was the life of Christ, and here we are today. An evolutionary timeline says about 14 billion years ago, what happened? They say there was a Big Bang. We will talk about the Big Bang in a future class that's in this course, and whether that's scientific or not. About 4.6 billion years ago, the Earth formed. About 3.8 billion years ago, the first life appears. And about 2.5 million years ago, the human line diverges from ape-like ancestors. So this is their claim, and you can see how radically different they are. And we want to know which really happened. And does it really matter? Oh, it most definitely matters. It affects everything about the way you live your life, the way you decide what's important, what's not important. It determines things like free will. It determines whether you're going to have an afterlife. It depends whether you should spend your life doing good or whether you should just spend your life satisfying yourself, right? All these questions are answered by who's right in this case.
Not only would the majority of Christians disagree with you, so would the majority of other religious people around the world. They don't believe that you have to think that the earth is 6,000 years old or that the flood was literal in order for salvation.
Creationism, also known as catastrophism, teaches that the Earth's geologic features were caused by a worldwide flood and then small local catastrophes after the worldwide flood. Humanism, or uniformitarianism, teaches that the Earth's geologic features were fashioned mostly by slow, gradual processes with a few catastrophes restricted to local events. No worldwide flood, and this took millions and millions and billions of years.
And as we will see, that's exactly what the evidence shows.
Walt Brown received a PhD in mechanical engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He was a National Science Foundation Fellow. He's taught college courses in physics, mathematics, and computer science. He's a retired Air Force, full colonel, West Point graduate, and former Army Ranger and paratrooper. During his 21 years of military service, he was the director of the Binet Laboratories, a major research, development, and engineering facility. He was a tenured associate professor at the U.S. Air Force Academy, chief of science and technology studies at the Air War College, and for much of his life, Walt Brown was an evolutionist and an atheist. But after years of study, he became convinced of the scientific validity of creation and a global flood.
That has to be one of the longest appeals to authority I've ever heard, and I didn't hear anything about geology at all in his background.
Now, he wrote a book quite a while ago called In the Beginning, Compelling Evidence for Creation and the Flood. It's a very, very scientific book, very technical book.
It's not scientific at all. He starts with his conclusion and then tries to make the facts support it.
I'm going to show a quick clip from Walt Brown explaining how the worldwide flood took place, the process of events that took place.
We can see on our planet 17 very strange features that can now be systematically explained as a result of a cataclysmic global flood whose waters erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 10 billion hydrogen bombs. This explanation shows us just how rapidly major mountains formed. It explains the coal and oil deposits, rapid continental drift, why ocean floors have huge trenches and hundreds of canyons and volcanoes. It explains the formation of the layered strata and most of the fossil record, the so-called ice ages, and major land canyons, especially the Grand Canyon.
An energy release exceeding the explosion of 10 billion hydrogen bombs. Walt Brown's claims are so fantastic, so far out there, that even Creation.com and other creation ministries dismiss them. Here's a quote from Creation.com on him. There's an old saying that if it's too good to be true, it probably is. I find much of Brown's model and many of his explanations of phenomena lacking in detailed evidence. Sometimes aspects of his model are unclear or incomplete, leading to difficulty understanding some of it.
Scientists today have discovered something called ringwoodite. The first terrestrial discovery of ringwoodite was by University of Alberta scientist Graham Pearson, which confirmed the presence of massive amounts of water 400 to 700 kilometers beneath the Earth's surface. What they're saying is that these diamonds have water inside of them, and they're 1.5% water weight. Now you think to yourself, well, 1.5% isn't very much. But when you get to the crust of the Earth, 1.5% is an enormous amount. In fact, it's actually more water under the crust of the Earth today than there is on top of the Earth. That's incredible. And so remember, that water actually used to be under the crust of the Earth, and there's still tons of water under there today.
And those water molecules are locked up inside the rock. You can't remove them without destroying the surrounding rock, and you certainly couldn't put them back again after the flood were over.
The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is a tear in the Earth's crust that goes all over the world. You can see it here. It actually comes up on land in Iceland, and people here are walking through it. In Genesis chapter 7, if you remember what it said, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. See, a lot of atheists or skeptics will say there's no way it could rain enough to cover the entire Earth. Well, remember, the water came from under the crust of the Earth. A lot of people will also say there's not enough water on planet Earth to cover Mount Everest. Mount Everest is 29,000 feet high, and so how in the world are you going to have enough water to cover it? Well, remember, Mount Everest didn't exist prior to the flood. It was actually created during the flood. So when all the mountains were covered, you didn't need to have water 29,000 feet high. It would have been able to cover the entire Earth at a much lower place. Then the mountains rose up, the water rushed off the continents and went into the oceans.
But we know that Mount Everest took tens of millions of years to form under natural processes. It must be nice to just make things up as you go along. The original video from the course is over an hour long, and I have a lot going on this week. Plus, I'm trying to keep my responses down to about 10 minutes to 15 minutes per video, so we're going to stop for now. Next week, I'll have another installation of the response to the Creationist course against evolution, and until then, I will see you later.